podcast is brought to you by me, Amanda Bear. We'll talk about topics that you don't normally read about in marketing literature that tell you more about the what, but not the how of marketing in the real world. You'll hear great conversations with leaders and up-and-comers who intersect with marketing and have been testing and learning and paving the way every day. Visit futurefitmarketing.com.au for access to resources and past episodes. If you've reached the heights of marketing leadership, what's next? Can marketers really make good CEOs? Whilst it's more typical that a CFO is the natural choice for progression to CEO because they have a good grasp on the numbers, these days marketing leaders are significantly more data literate. That, balanced with creativity and generally a good amount of emotional intelligence, marketers are sometimes underestimated and can make excellent CEOs. One person who has taken the leap is Brent Hill, who speaks candidly about his role and the challenges of his transition from CMO to CEO. An Adelaide, South Australian native, Brent joined Tourism Fiji as CEO in July 2021. After a number of award-winning years as CMO at South Australian Tourism, Brent played a key role in reopening Fiji to tourists on December 1, 2021, and has helped steer the Tourism Fiji team towards the 2024 goal of $3 billion in visitor economy contribution. With over 370,000 tourists arriving, as of August 2022, tourism is well on the path of recovery in Fiji. All right, Future Fit marketers, I have Brent Hill here, who is actually the CEO of Tourism Fiji. Really lucky to have him on, and we want to dig in and find out a little bit about his background. So, Brent, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in marketing and leadership?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you very much for having me, Amanda. It's lovely to come to you from beautiful Fiji. So I am Adelaide born in South Australia. I discovered marketing at university and joined Telstra's graduate program. That was where I, first got my start in marketing. So that took me around the country a little bit. So I lived in Brisbane for a little while, lived in Sydney for a little while, and then back in Adelaide. And eventually settled back in Adelaide, and I was there, worked a number of different roles across telco, retail, finance, and then eventually at the South Australian Tourism Commission, which was a wonderful opportunity for about 6 years. And then the opportunity came up to, really sort of, test my skills and I guess, give back to the team and the industry as well. So I moved across to Fiji in the middle of the pandemic in July last year. So I've been here just over a year now.
It sounds like you've done quite a bit of moving around, and your experience in marketing to now Tourism Fiji. What were you thinking? What made you make the leap?
Yeah, I think, for my wife and I, it was a really good opportunity. We were looking for, doing something that was a little bit different. We had always planned on potentially, living overseas and giving that a bit of a crack. So, from that perspective, it was about trying to find the right opportunity in the right place. So, yeah, funnily enough, it doesn't rain, it pours. There was a couple of opportunities that came up at the same time that were, different parts of the world. And I guess in the end, we felt this opportunity with Tourism Fiji was really compelling. It was a great opportunity to come into a market. Both Kelly and I had been to Fiji, so we knew, a fair bit about it. And also, you could see the need and the give back. So, from that perspective, that was one of the real desires to get into a role that, I could really sort of sink my teeth into. And it certainly has been that.
I think the give back scenario is an interesting one, and you have spent over 5 years at Tourism South Australia, and I'd be keen to unpack some of the skills that you developed over that time, and how has it then translated into your job now?
Yeah, look, I mean, it was probably the best grounding I possibly could have, to be honest, to come into a CEO role like this. I think when you work with governments, that's a challenge in itself, in the sense of working through all the different, I guess, protocols and the political side of things, which was something that, previous to my time at South Australian Tourism, I didn't have that level of experience, and that is a different world. So, having that experience has certainly helped, transition across to Fiji. I think, being a marketer, getting creative ideas through, getting plans launched, etc. South Australia was a really good grounding for that in terms of being able to bring that over to here. Plus, also that sort of due diligence side and managing through a board, etc. So the good thing has been, I think, like with any person entering a role, like with as a new CEO, you sort of think, am I going to be up to this challenge? What if there's something that comes along that I haven't seen before? And I think the good thing has been that my background and my grounding, and I worked really closely with Rod Harricks, the CEO in SATC, so he taught me a lot. So it was really the perfect grounding. So I think that side of things, I definitely feel like I was well prepared to come across.
You talk about weathering the storm and also the background from a government perspective. Can you give any sort of challenging examples or great things that you achieved at SA that has really grounded you into your new role? And obviously the background of you starting through lockdown and through COVID
Yeah,
as well. What a challenging time. It'd
yeah.
be interesting to see how you have adapted.
Yeah, I think, because one of the challenges is marketers always want to be very creative. And of course, what you understand very quickly when you work in a tourism destination is it is funded by government, so they do have a say. So, it's not like you can just get anything, across the line. So you've really got to understand, what it is you're trying to achieve, and then go through all the right channels to get all the right approvals. And I think from that perspective, that can be difficult sometimes for marketers, because marketers tend to want to, have free reign, do what they like, working with their agencies, etc. And you've got to be prepared to compromise, and the fact that what might go to market might be a little bit different to what you originally planned. So I think coming across to Fiji, probably here in Fiji, I've got a really supportive, government and board. They're very, economically focused in terms of, through the pandemic, it was very much around how can we be safe, but also how can we open quickly. So I've got to say, that level of support has been really good, and that real understanding of sort of the economic side of things. So yeah, I think from that side, as a marketer, you would always wish to be able to execute and get things to market quickly. But I think anybody in any role needs to understand and appreciate that there's a approval process, and sometimes there's things that you don't necessarily think about as a marketer. You've got to think about the broader implications that you've got to take into consideration.
Can I unpack the approval processes from this role and your last role as well? And I think, and I'm going to make assumptions here, from a government standpoint, there are long planning cycles, as you call out with marketing. You can get campaigns out to market. You plan things as things happen. I'm keen to sort of unpack the differences in planning cycles, how you look at setting yourself up for success, and obviously coming out of COVID as well, how you think about that structure and mobilising your teams.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that I've always believed in a philosophy that sort of says 20% strategy, 80% execution. Government, unfortunately, around the world is notorious for spending a lot of time on the strategic side, putting together big glossy documents, etc., and then the execution failing dismally. And a lot of the traditional model as well is that you have people come in to do the strategy, and then they're not the same people that then go and execute. So the guys who are then relied upon to go and execute often don't have the skin in the game. They don't understand why they're being asked to do something. They don't understand that strategic direction. So that can be difficult, and also, like, I guess in an extreme example, when I had a period of time when I was working at South Australian Tourism where that the government sort of would change the approvals model, and so all of a sudden you'd have essentially a committee that approved work, and really that committee weren't marketers; they were just people that were connected to government, and really their job was sort of, I guess, trying to safeguard the government to some degree, and sort of saying, what's coming through, and looking at it through that lens. So you do get different models, but I think the biggest thing with marketers is just to realise you might have everything in your mind really clear, but it is important to get some alternate points of view that can try and help, I guess, formalise what you put out in the market.
I might switch things up a bit and ask a bit more of a personal question. I think as you make decisions about international moves, as well as taking that next step up, it's important that you bring your family on the journey as well. They can often hinder or help your success.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about how you brought your wife or your family on the journey, and how's that sort of settled in?
Yeah, look, it's very true, Amanda. I mean, there's lots of studies actually about the expat process, and it's amazing that the very high percentage of expats that might only last 6 months and then potentially return. And a lot of those studies, what they look at is a combination of things, which is the mental toughness and the mental resilience, but also just the happiness. I'm very lucky. My wife Kelly, she gave up a lot in terms of, like, knowingly gave up a lot in terms of her role in Adelaide, knowing that wasn't necessarily going to be something that she could immediately drop into over here in Fiji. So she then entered a course of study and sort of did some consulting and sort of part-time freelancing and those kinds of elements. But when you move to a different country, you've got different rules around business, different elements around immigration. So none of those things are easy. So really, it's a great question, because I would always say to people, test your limits and stretch yourself and grow, and you can, do the expat life, but just be prepared that, it's not simple. Kel and I, we had a clear view of, that we always knew that we could go back to Adelaide at some point. We're going to keep some assets there and so on. So we knew that we could always go back to Adelaide. We have, love Adelaide dearly and got lots of good friends there, but we were pretty committed that, we were going to be away from Adelaide for some time. So yeah, it can't be underestimated, that level of mental and emotional assistance that you need. You've got to be very close as a couple. You've got to, really talk things through. And what I've sort of tried to do as well is now within our firm, within Tourism Fiji, when we bring people over to come and work for us from different parts of the world, we do a lot better job now of induction and getting people used to and understanding the country, because you just can't drop into another country and expect to, pick things up. So yeah, we work really hard on that, and then that's a consistent basis that you check in with the people in the team and say, how's everything going, etc., for some months after they've arrived.
I think I might expand on that, because around the world we're seeing a lot of labour shortages, tough recruitment challenges, having to pay exorbitant fees to get people through. How are you finding the talent scenario?
Yeah, look, it's Fiji is a developing country, right? So we're less than around 900,000 people across the country. So obviously we have a process to try and bring in locals first, but there are certain roles in places like Fiji, for example, like our head of digital. We just unfortunately just didn't have that skill set in Fiji, because there's just not that many large scale businesses that have got global facing operations. So, Fiji Airways, of course, is one of those, for places like Fiji Water, for example, a lot of the Fiji Water corporate office is in US, for example. So a lot of those big businesses, they might have overseas offices. So what we've sort of tended to find is the best model is to bring in somebody who's really talented and got that broader outlook on life, I guess, that they want to do something like an expat, because you do have to be thinking bigger than just yourself to do that, and bring them over. And then what we do is pair them up with some young guns that are coming through here in Fiji, and it's a real education process where they learn, they grow, and eventually they can get to that point where they can step into that role. So that's something we work really hard on. It's not easy, and I guess it's a little bit similar to even with Adelaide. When I was in Adelaide trying to find certain types of roles, we were always encouraged to, of course, choose local, but sometimes it just wasn't available. I didn't believe in corporate welfare and just bringing somebody on just because they came from Adelaide. And I thought it was a better outcome if we actually brought in really skilled professionals, potentially from interstate, who could educate our guys and grow our guys, so eventually down the track, they could take over. And so that's the sort of model I'm trying to build here.
I know it's just over a year ago now, but I'm keen to understand how you prepared for your role. In this podcast, I talk about the first 100 days. And it's critical to sort of establishing your runway, your reputational capital. How did you prepare for the role, and what did your sort of first 100 days look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, Amanda, I think every plan I had, every thought process probably went out of the window, to be honest. It was a very, very difficult process. Not going to lie. It was, compounded, of course, dramatically by COVID. So just to give you an idea of that, the recruitment process began over the summer of 2021. So, by about February 21, I knew I was coming across to Fiji. There was a lot of discussion around the bubble. If you recall back then, Fiji had no cases. A lot of Australia had no cases. So it was like, how could we do this bubble to fly people over and keep things going? So that was sort of the original plan. And then unfortunately, literally on the day of both when I was resigning from SATC and I was going to be announced as CEO of Tourism Fiji, Fiji unfortunately had some cases of COVID occur. So that put a real spanner in the works, because then we had to sort of hold off on everything. So it was a real limbo sort of period. It was very difficult. Obviously, a lot of people in Fiji are very focused on trying to deal with the COVID outbreak. And meanwhile, I had resigned from my role, so had Kelly. So it was considerably difficult. Lots of anxiety, I've got to say. It was quite a difficult sort of period. But, during that time, I did have the opportunity to speak to the former CEO of Tourism Fiji. So I got to really sort of talk to him about, lots of key things that he'd seen and understand from him, what were some of the challenges, successes, good things about the role. And I could also talk to some people on the ground about living in Fiji. But of course, the reality of life had changed a lot. So when we actually moved over, there was a 6 p.m. curfew. We obviously didn't have a house. It was very difficult searching for a house. So all of those factors, very big confluence of factors that made things really difficult. So in terms of setting out what I wanted to do, it was actually really simple. Actually just simplified things right back to, we've got to open the country. We had a date, and then it was like, how are we going to do that and turn around some of the messaging? Because by that stage, the world was understanding that Fiji was sort of stricken with COVID. So we had to do a real job to turn a lot of that around, and that really sharpened what I had to do.
It sounds like you had a lot of complexity from a personal perspective, but it sounded that approach about being simple and making sure you've got a sort of very simple plan is probably a good one. I'm curious about how you felt taking the role. Did you feel imposter syndrome, and if so, how have you overcome it?
Yeah, look, I think everybody has that to some degree. I think you have that. Not so much imposter syndrome. I think it was more, different culture, different experience, different people. How's this going to go? how they're going to receive, what I was trying to do. Not so much imposter syndrome. I think it was more, different culture, different experience, different people. How's this going to go? How they're going to receive, what I was trying to do. And also coming in at the time that I was coming in, which was, in in the middle of a COVID battle, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also, you want to establish your credibility pretty quickly and your style pretty quickly. The one thing I probably regret, Amanda, is Kelly, my wife, has always been really good at touching base with a psychologist quite regularly, just from sharing different things. I think we still have a perception of you only go to a psychologist when things are going wrong, whereas Kelly, was very much, healthy, sound-minded, but had the opportunity to talk to somebody with expertise and say, this is how I'm feeling, this is difficult, etc., and found some really good passages and paths and tools out of that. And that's probably my one regret, that I didn't do that soon enough, early enough, just to have that other sounding board that I could just talk about myself and what I was feeling. So I would certainly recommend that to anybody.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, with the roles that you've had before versus now, what skills or behavioural traits do you think you gathered at SA, for example, that has helped you with this current role?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is that, resilience, I guess, of, not getting too down if things outside of your sphere of influence, impact. So, in South Australia, obviously from a natural disaster perspective, we had the bushfires, we had COVID, and then of course, as I say, we had, political elements that used to come into it, or a board, or et cetera. And I think those lessons, I guess, of learning that have been really valuable, because obviously, in Fiji, it's similar. We've got a government here that we've got to work through. Sometimes, they've got to change tack for whatever reason, and you've got to go along with that. And so I think in that sense, it's, understanding what you are there to do, understanding what your role is, and being really clear about your role, but understanding that can change. And so I think the one thing I learned through South Australia that I feel held me in great stead was that, resilience and toughness, not to just go to pieces if something didn't quite go the way I wanted it to go, and being quite adaptable. But, I also always saw that, creativity and execution and being in market mattered. Sometimes I think you can spend so long like agonizing over something and then put it to market, and you expect a certain reaction and it just doesn't come. And in that time, it would have been better to actually have just been in marketing and getting your message out, because, a lot of marketing is about repetition and getting cut through and getting your message across and making your brand physically and mentally available. So, yeah, I think that's a really important thing that, I've kept here in my role. I'm still a marketer, even though I'm CEO and much more broad now in terms of not just dealing with the marketing, but I'm still a marketer at my heart.
I think some of those principles, like being in market, like creativity, are really critical things. And I'd ask you, is there anything else from a principled standpoint in marketing specifically that has helped you with this role?
Yeah, I think because marketing understands brand, I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think marketers are a little bit more emotionally intelligent. So they're a little bit more self-aware, a little bit more understanding of those kind of elements and consumer behaviour, those kinds of things. So I think that stands me in good stead. I've been asked a few times, why aren't as many marketers CEOs? And I think traditionally, people have always said, marketers haven't got a good grasp on numbers and they're a bit more, creative and emotive. I think the first one is a misnomer. Like, my background was with a commerce degree. I worked for a financial institution, so numbers were really exciting to me. And I think as a marketer, if you're not data driven, you're not going to survive, especially now as, more and more percentage of your spend goes on digital. So I think from that perspective, I think marketers do make great CEOs. I think they also think about their staff, think about the human impact. So they are a little bit more connected to the human side, that the emotive side, and that's a really important thing. And I think that's something I learned a lot about in my time as a marketer that I've applied. So I certainly feel well qualified to be where I'm at today.
What excites you about the opportunities at Tourism Fiji?
Well, what we have to play with, of course. Fiji is such an amazing place, and so it is wonderful in the sense of Fiji is so highly regarded and so aspirational around the world. My one piece of advice when I left South Australia to the guys in South Australia was, look, South Australia is an incredibly beautiful place, so I always love it. It's not first thought of in South Australia. So because you're competing against, beautiful places or that are well known, like, Queensland, Sydney, etc. So, part of my advice to the guys in SA was you have to be creative to grab attention. And I think we were really successful in doing that over the 6 years that I was there, because otherwise, unfortunately, people just won't think of Adelaide or South Australia because it's a lot smaller. It's a boutique place. So it was like, how do you, really push into that boutique special element and bring that out? So here in Fiji, I'm very fortunate that, while we're small, we're really well thought of, aspirational. So our job is really to just continue to make sure that people know that we're here, that we're the buzz destination, and the breadth and depth of what we have. I think that's a big challenge for us. I think people know Fiji for, like the image behind me, beautiful beaches, clear water, amazing accommodation. But the depth of what is here in Fiji is what's really exciting to me. So really telling that story, like the hinterland areas, the waterfalls, and the cultural diversity of Fiji, we're really wanting to make sure that comes through. So I think from that side of things, that's what I'm really excited about, is giving that depth of story about Fiji.
Yeah, not a hard topic to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, what advice would you provide to marketing leaders right now who want to take the leap to CEO?
Do it. Definitely do it. I think a lot of marketers have got aspirations where they say, I want to have a bit more of a seat at the table and a bit more of a say. Sometimes they feel like, when I talk to marketers, they feel like they're dictated to, here's your budget, here's what you've got to go and do. And it's, like you really have to apply the marketing science. Ehrenberg Bass is one of the best institutes going around in South Australia. They gave me so much grounding. And I think, once you have that side, and you understand, data, insights, return on investment, numbers, etc., you're very well qualified to go to the next step. And the one thing I would say to people is don't forget where you came from. So, I do talk to my CMO quite a lot, Emma, and, just like help her. I don't step on her toes. I let her be her own person, but, I do still love that side of things and really want to assist where I can without sort of, being too overbearing. So, yeah, I think there's a lot. I think that some marketers think, if I'm the CEO, I'll lose all that creativity and I'll get bogged down in the accounting sort of boring stuff that I didn't want to do at uni or whatever. But, I think it's a bigger role, like you have a bigger remit. And so I think in that sense, that's really exciting because you can really enact change. And if you are somebody that wants to do that and genuinely believes that your work can influence, then go ahead and do it.
Last question for you. So since this podcast is about being future fit, outside of Ehrenberg Bass, are there any other resources that are your go-to for leadership and marketing?
Yeah, well, like as I say, the sort of psychology side is really important. So I've got a guy that I follow really closely, who a number of sports people work with from a sort of a high performance perspective. There's also, somebody that I'm just starting out to talk to in that space around leadership. My CMO, I actually put my CMO onto a corporate coach called Jack Phillips, And she's been wonderful to bring things through. And also, probably the other one is the HBDI HR program, just in terms of what that's very good at, and similar to the Enneagram piece is it helps you to understand people's preferred thinking styles. Because I think, sometimes you're in a room and you've got a lot of different people in the room together, and you're thinking, why aren't we not progressing here? And part of that can be that you often have people that are all thinking similarly cognitive paths. So what you actually need to do is to make sure that you've got cognitive diversity within a team, and that's where HBDI was fabulous, and Enneagram and those kind of services are great, just to understand your team really well. So then you can say, oh, this person is reacting like that largely because this is their preferred mode of thinking. So if I ask in a certain way, I can really tap into and get out what I need. So it can be a cheerleader, motivator, leading from the front, pushing from behind. But probably the most important thing is understand your team. If you understand team and then get a good team around you and get that cognitive diversity, you can do anything.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Brent, for jumping on the Future Fit Marketing podcast. Really appreciate your time, and all the best with Fiji.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Vinaka.
Visit futurefitmarketing.com.au for access to resources and past episodes. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, share this podcast series with someone else, and thanks for paying it forward.